Unfortunately, we run into a lot more legislators who are either uneducated on the issue or just against it entirely. Every now and again, we'll find a good one.
Hello, world. Welcome to the Vaping Unplugged podcast. Everything you need to know about vaping and tobacco harm reduction.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. We're back with another episode of Vaping Unplugged. I'm Lisa. I'm going to be your host tonight, and we are generally discussing tobacco harm reduction policies all around the world, vaping, snus, all the other less risky nicotine alternative products and legislation around them. And today we will be talking about what's going on in the USA. And I'm really thrilled that we'll have Elizabeth Hicks as our guest from Consumer Choice Center. Elizabeth is Affairs Analyst for the Consumer Choice Center. She's fighting a lot for consumers and defending them for a lot of prohibitionism and restrictions in the US. So I'm really thrilled to listen to Liz today and listen to what's going on in the USA when it comes to vaping and general tendency of restrictions. So we're going to be diving deep into that. So thank you so much, Liz, for making it to our interview today. I'm really thrilled.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I was on Vaping Unplugged, I think, for the very first episode. So what a pleasure it is to be back and be here with Lisa this time. So hello to all of you listeners out there.
Absolutely. I think you were with my colleague, but it was a long time ago and a lot of things changed, and we'll be talking about that for sure. But before we talk about that and discuss the policies, maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself, because I think the last episode was a while ago, so it would be nice for the new listeners to tell them about your work and maybe your journey in vaping, harm reduction. How did you end up in this field? I mean, I know you're not only doing that, but anyway.
Yes, for sure. Well, yeah, so in the U.S. Affairs Analyst with the Consumer Choice Center, which is a global consumer advocacy group, and a good portion of the work that I focus on is in advancing tobacco harm reduction efforts here in the United States. So for me, the goal is to get legislators to embrace tobacco harm reduction policies that are actually going to incentivize consumers to switch to these less harmful nicotine alternatives without bans on products. These types of policies that are really helpful, in my opinion, are ones that will be lowering taxes on nicotine alternatives, allowing a full range of flavors, and also allowing an open market for these products to actually compete, so consumers can get both the most options and the best products available on the market. So I'm lucky in that I get to talk to legislators regularly to make this case for consumers and push back against regulations that limit access to vaping and other nicotine products. For me personally, there's such a ripe opportunity here to improve public health without prohibition. And that's where a lot of my passion lies, is ensuring that we can get people these alternatives that are less harmful, are going to improve their health and ensure that they live longer, healthier lives that they enjoy at the same time.
It's actually really interesting that you talk with legislators. Maybe it would be interesting for the listeners to know about how they react to the arguments that you make in favor of vaping and less risky nicotine alternatives, whether they are informed or not about this field whatsoever, because they're the ones who are eventually deciding for consumers, right? So what's your perception of the dialogue, basically?
Oh, it's interesting. That's for sure. Unfortunately, we run into a lot more legislators who are either uneducated on the issue or just against it entirely. Every now and again, we'll find a good one. Especially recently, we've seen a few more politicians popping in nicotine pouches or vaping outside. So that I think is good. At least we know they're aware of these products and some of them are consuming them. So that's great. But unfortunately, the tobacco control side of things, those that are kind of on the other side of this issue than we are, they do a good job at spreading misinformation to these legislators. And so when I'm meeting with them, a lot of it is just showing them the actual studies, the actual evidence, the data that this misinformation is not real. It's obviously false, and showing them here's some real evidence. And we point to England a lot. Public Health England did a great job with their study. I'm sure everybody here is aware of it, that showcased that vaping is 95% less harmful than smoking. good one. And so making sure they see that actual study is crucial. This is an entire government that did this study. So, this is not some one-off. This is a huge study that's been done, the largest one to my knowledge, on this issue. And so making sure they're aware of the actual evidence in place is crucial. Even then, honestly, they're not always the most perceptive, but we have a multitude of tactics. So obviously the evidence is a big side. The other side is just making it personal, like telling a story. And so for me, I was diagnosed with cancer a few years ago. Happy to report, very healthy now. But using that story with legislators to showcase, like, if we have your constituents switch over to something less harmful, then they're not going to end up in a situation that I was in where they're going to have to go through treatment. And that is a very easy sell. Obviously, not everybody has that story, and hopefully you don't. If you do, God bless. But another story that I hear a lot too is, a family member who was a smoker for a long time and had health issues because of that. We know, almost everybody knows somebody who has been affected by a tobacco-related illness or disease. And so really showcasing that as well, I think, goes a long way to personalize it, and just paint the picture of, we want people to be healthier. We aren't going to do that through, prohibition or bans or anything of that sort. We're going to have to take a different approach.
Yeah, it's crazy with not only in the USA, but this kind of approach can be applicable with everyone else, because it's so important to share things that are really personal for many consumers. Like daily, we communicate with many vapers or consumers of other less risky nicotine products. And for them, it's really important to have those products in place every day, because otherwise they would switch back to deadly combustion. But somehow policymakers either don't know about these stories or they ignore them. So it's definitely really important. I have one more question, since you mentioned the tobacco control side when you were talking about it and how they're doing a good job with misinformation. Maybe we could talk about the implications of that, or maybe a process that is going on in the US right now. So are there any legislative updates on federal or a state level? Maybe I'm asking for too lot right now. It might be that there is a lot from what I've read. There are many bills, but could you maybe give us a sum up of what's going on right now?
Yeah, there is a lot of movement in the US on these types of bills and policies. We're seeing them at a local level, a state level, and then the federal level or the national level as well. So it's kind of all over the map right now. From the local side, which I think is important to mention, because a new strategy that's been taken by the tobacco control side is to really go after localities, municipalities, like these little towns or little cities. They have boards of health, and they're putting through bills through these boards of health that are going to restrict consumer access to these products. What then happens is the state will see that, oh, well, the municipalities and towns and cities have already passed it. So clearly the majority of the people already want this. So we're going to go forth and do it at a state level. And then federally, they could see states doing this and be like, oh, well, they've already done this in the states, so let's do it federally as well. So it's really important to look at it at all of these different levels, because they play off of each other quite a bit. And so locally right now, we're seeing a big push for nicotine-free generation, which is so silly to me. Before we had seen tobacco-free generation, of course, but now for whatever reason, we're moving on to just all of nicotine, a much more encompassing umbrella, unfortunately, which, again, speaking to my points earlier, really go against improving public health. We're not banning cigarettes. No, I don't think we should ban cigarettes either, by the way, but, we're not doing that, but we are making plays to ban, all these other products as well. And it seems like a really unfortunate move for our legislators to make. We're also seeing a lot of sales restrictions at the local level, but then moving on to the state side, this is where we see a lot more activity happening. Typically, I've been testifying in these types of committees in the states for several years now. We typically see a lot of bills that are focused on increasing taxes on nicotine alternatives, of course, flavor bans on all of these types of products, and then a couple other bad ones as well. There's one that's known as the PMTA registry bill, which, again, when I was saying these levels play off of each other with local, state, and federal, this is one where states are playing off of federal policy, with the failure of the FDA and what they've approved. And I could dig into that a little bit later as well. But these bills, these PMTA bills, are restricting access for consumers. It's essentially saying whatever the FDA has approved for the entire country, that's only what we're going to allow in the states. The FDA has done a horrible job, spoiler alert, on setting up this regulated market. So there is very few products that the FDA has actually approved, meaning these markets are so small right now. Also, a lot of the smaller vaping companies or manufacturers aren't able to be in this market. It's very expensive to get through the FDA process. And so we're only seeing, a certain number of devices from a certain amount of companies come actually to the market for consumers. So that's very problematic. And then kind of leading into the federal side, FDA needs a lot of reform. That's something that us at the Consumer Choice Center are continuing to push for. We have seen some improvements, though. Previously, there was a menthol ban that the Biden administration had put forth. That has since been repealed, so that's great. So menthol is still available. And then there is also a current proposal, again, also from the Biden administration. It was put through at the 11th hour, right as Biden was leaving office. And this is to cap all nicotine levels to a very low amount. I don't have that exact number on me, so please forgive me, but it essentially would destroy the nicotine market entirely. That proposed rule is still open for public comment. It should wrap up in September, and we'll have a better idea there. We are hopeful, though, that with this new administration, there have been some comments made by President Trump that he is going to save flavored vaping. So I don't know what that looks like. Maybe there's concepts of a plan. We're not sure. But we're hoping that that actually happens and that we do see something put forth legislatively from a federal level to really rectify the situation that's happened with the FDA and to ensure that products do come to market and that, we're heading in the right direction. I guess on a positive side, that was a lot of bad news. So apologies there to our listeners. On a good note, though, we are seeing some good bills come through the states as well. A couple ones I've been working on recently, they're known as tax differential bills, which essentially means they'll be taxing the alternatives lower than they would be taxing combustible cigarettes. This is a huge win in our opinion because it's going to financially incentivize consumers to switch to potentially a less harmful option. So that is definitely an improvement, but it's all over the board right now. And, we'll keep fighting away and make sure that we protect these rights for consumers.
Yeah, definitely. And it's also basically stating in itself that combustion and less risky nicotine products are not the same. They're not kind of categorized under the same umbrella, which is what we are fighting on our end with many different policymakers. And this is the legislation almost in many countries. So you mentioned that there are many bad news, but we're kind of used to it when it comes to vaping. It's like always some of more and more restrictions coming, but we're trying to fight the misinformation. It's crazy that you mentioned that everyone is going, like the policymakers are going after nicotine now. It was tobacco, but now they're rewording it. And that's I was talking to our amazing advocate Maria in a previous episode. Our listeners will see that, and she mentioned that the same is happening in Canada. So basically, they will be changing this bill and renaming it to nicotine one. So it's really sad to see because nicotine products are used in nicotine replacement therapy as well. So it's like also kind of doesn't make any sense, but we'll see how it's going. It's important to keep on fighting, as you said. And you mentioned already about FDA a little bit, but I would like to hear more actually what's going on FDA front. You mentioned that they have been really bad, but maybe you could elaborate on that part.
Get ready for a fun story on just government malfeasance and terrible oversight. So FDA is, especially when it comes to the Center for Tobacco Products, is a total mess right now, unfortunately. Back in 2009, the Tobacco Control Act was passed, which essentially created the Center for Tobacco Products through the FDA, which is the Food and Drug Administration in the US. And that gave what's known as the CTP, Center for Tobacco Products, it gave them authority to oversee the tobacco market, essentially. What happened since then has been quite interesting. it also encompasses obviously nicotine in general, not just tobacco. So it also encompasses all of the vaping devices, the heated tobacco products, nicotine pouches, everything now. So what they did is originally you needed to submit a PMTA, which stands for pre-market tobacco application. So let's say you're a company and you want to get, your product to market. You have to submit a PMTA to the FDA for them to review. The guidelines the FDA gave for these applications were very relaxed and not very clear. So essentially you have to show that your product benefits public health. Okay, very open-ended. How does one show that? Not sure. And so a lot of companies, went forth. There was over 26 million applications submitted to the FDA for these PMTAs. A lot of different companies submitted them. At the end of the day, again, 26 million were submitted. To date, less than 30 products have been approved by the FDA, which is obviously it's like a very small fraction of what was submitted. Of these 30 products, it's essentially 8 devices. Only 5 are available on the market currently of these vaping devices, and they're only in tobacco flavors for vaping devices. All of the flavored nicotine products were rejected originally. And there's roughly 500,000 pending applications still, but the Center for Tobacco Products just is like, we don't have the resources. We're working on it. We'll get to it when we get to it. They're supposed to have a 180-day deadline, by the way. It's been like 5 years. So it's just slow burn right now. It is very inefficient, very ineffective. At the end of last year, Brian King, who I believe is still the head of Center for Tobacco Products, it might switch over now that the admin switched over, but he stated that the FDA essentially needed more resources to handle this issue, including millions more in dollars for funding to create a task force. And this task force is going to be the FDA, the DEA, which is the Drug Enforcement Agency, the IRS, the tax people, the Customs and Border Patrol people, and the Postal Service. Super interesting, like Avengers lineup of government agencies, but their goal is to tackle the illicit market and stop the flood of illicit products coming in. Ironically, they could do that if they just regulated the legal market more effectively and streamlined these applications coming to market. Obviously, it's an economic issue, right? Supply and demand. If you limit the supply, but there's high demand, the illicit market's always going to fill that gap, where the regulated market could if our legislators would allow that. So it's been really messy. Again, I'll give you one sign of hope here as well. Just earlier this year, a couple months ago, the FDA did gave Zyn, which are the nicotine pouch people, a PMTA approval. Not only did they give them an approval, but they gave them an approval for all of their flavors, which is the first time in the US anything has gotten a flavor approval through the FDA, which is a really big deal. And so we're really excited for that. So great for pouches. We're hoping, though, that this sets a precedent for vaping flavors as well. If they think, these pouches are improving public health enough where flavors are okay, then the same case could and should be made for vapes as well and other nicotine alternatives. So there's some hope in the hopper that things will improve, but I think it's going to be a little slow to get there, but there's hope. There's light at the end of the tunnel, I think.
Yeah, so at least that, that's already a big step, I guess. When you were talking about the illicit trade, it always drives me crazy how policymakers or politicians impose prohibitions, then they get illicit trade, then they want to fight it, and they fight it with more prohibitions, which does make sense.
Make sense. It's so crazy.
Yeah, and that's happening in many countries. So it's like, kind of global disease, I would say. On the other hand, you already talked about the illicit trade, but could you maybe talk about whether there is a tendency of seeing a rise in it after more and more restrictions? Because the biggest myth about vaping and the valley that we usually debunk here in this podcast as well with many experts, that also happened because of the products that were purchased on the black market, right? So it's an important factor when it comes to public health as well. Consumers are exposed to we don't know what on the black market. So what's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, if I had $1 for every time I heard that vapes cause E-Valley or popcorn lung, I could probably retire. It's insane how frequent this myth is, projected, even though it's been debunked countless of times. It's insane. But yes, the illicit market, the more that we put forth these prohibitionist policies, the more the illicit market thrives. And we've seen this in the States in many great examples. There have been some fantastic studies done, especially in the states that have done flavor bans and just essentially limited consumer access to the legal market. Probably not surprising to this audience, but in states where these products were banned, the illicit market just exploded. It was a huge growth for anybody in that illicit space. So California is one of the examples we like to look at. There's a really good empty pack study where essentially these researchers went, and this is not a job I would sign up for, but picked out empty packages of vapes and cigarettes out of trash cans to see where they came from, if they were taxed, if they were illicit, if they were flavored. California put in a flavor ban that is pretty infamous. The result of the study basically showed, though, that the flavors didn't reduce at all. It just switched to the illicit market. There was still the same amount of flavor products, being consumed. They just now were not through the legal market. They were through the illicit market. And then they took it a step further to figure out, well, where are these illicit products coming from? And for the vaping side, a majority of the products in California that were illicit were coming from China. And then for the cigarettes, the majority of the cigarettes in California were actually coming from Mexico through the cartels. So just a huge explosion for bad actors to take advantage of this downfall in policy here in the US. Massachusetts was somewhat similar. They were actually the first state to ban flavored vaping products. They have an illegal tobacco task force, which sounds really cool, I'm not going to lie. But they basically look into all of the different data points on sales and trade and, where things are coming from, how it's just being consumed. And there they found that the taxes went way down, tax revenue from tobacco products or nicotine products, because no one can buy as many now. And then two, the other reason is that they were getting all of these products from neighboring states. So they were just going to Connecticut or Rhode Island or somewhere else to get these products and then bring it in. So very, very problematic, showcasing yet again, prohibition doesn't work. We, of course, learned this in the US back in the 1920s with alcohol. For some reason, our politicians love to go to the old playbook of bad policies and just bring it back forth and maybe it'll work this time. It won't, but that's fine. So we'll keep pushing back against that. But yeah, again, the illicit market doesn't work. Another point I bring up with legislators too about the illicit market is, for us in the US, and I'm sure abroad as well, one of the big concerns about vaping is youth access to it. Which we are on board with. We have a bill, or I should say that we have a law in the US that you can only be 21 or older to purchase nicotine. That was put in not too terribly long ago, essentially to create that wider gap between those that are in high school and then those that are in college, and making sure you can't get those products as easily from your friends and things like that. However, what I point out to legislators is that the illicit market doesn't care. They're not checking IDs. They do not care at all. So the more that we ban these from the legal market and the more that we embolden the illicit market, the easier it actually is for youth to get these products, which goes against everything they're trying to do in the first place. So that's always my argument, is a lot of these bills and policies are just not even viable in achieving their desired outcomes. So let's go back to the drawing board and look at some policies that actually work.
Yeah, for sure. That's an important argument. And I wanted to ask you about, we talked about illicit trades, we talked about the policymaking side right now, right? And generally, how do they react and whether they are misinformed or not. But I want to go on a consumer end right now a little bit, because misinformation is targeting not only politicians, and it's also targeting consumers, right? There is this scary, outlets and with scary kind of highlighting topics, and you might see a scary article, but in reality, it might just be showcasing some of the misleading information or misinformation around general less risky nicotine alternatives. Would it be vaping or anything else? And that happened many, many times, just a clickbait, And but on the other hand, it really affects people because they're now gonna. It's our job to look at the research and evidence, but the regular consumer might not spend that much time just searching for more scientific evidence and digging into the methodology of this or that research paper. So what's going on when it comes to consumers? Like when you were talking that many of them are still buying the products, which means that they are consuming those products, and probably it's important for them to get those products and they know more or less about them. But is there misinformation which is problematic as well?
Very much so, yes. Even when I'm just anecdotally from myself and I'm talking to, friends or family, they're under the impression that vaping is just as harmful, if not more harmful than smoking. When I talk to my doctors, they say the same thing. I'm like, no. Let me get you the study from Public Health England. You're going to love it. And it's a big issue though. I mean, and it's so prevalent. It's very challenging to know what is real, what is not, we're not all scientists. I don't have a scientific background where, I can figure out the ins and outs of, was it conducted in a legit way or not? Luckily, we do have a lot of geniuses in this space that can tell us that. So definitely follow them on Twitter and see what they say. But it is challenging to know. I know there was a recent article that came out in the Mirror in the UK that was just insane. I mean, it was just full of nonsense. And when I read that article, I was like, is any of this legitimate? It doesn't sound like it is, but I don't know how they conducted the study. And then luckily, again, some of those geniuses I mentioned before basically showcase like the way they conducted the study does not make sense. And so to me, it's an issue with the media.
They just used the study which is not even concluded or public. So it's not even yeah.
So I think that's one of the big issues, though. It's like we're seeing these half-baked ideas from the control side come out, trying to like fear monger and scare people. And for what reason? Do you want them to stay smoking cigarettes? Like, do we want more people to die from very preventable diseases? To me, it seems so antithetical to improving public health. Let's go a different route. So it is tough, even for us. Like when I go and meet with legislators, I mean, they'll bring up a lot of these studies. Again, popcorn lung comes up about every time. Also in media, like not even just, like news media, but like entertainment media, we're seeing, things where it's like, no, vaping's bad. You should smoke cigarettes now. And it's like, where is this coming from? I thought like back when I was growing up, it's like, you shouldn't smoke cigarettes. It's bad. Now we innovated and have a less harmful nicotine product where you can still have nicotine, but not have the harmful combustible aspect. And for some reason, we're now saying this innovation is also just as harmful. Does not make any sense. So it is a challenge. I would say to combat the misinformation, one is like, look into some of these studies, follow people like World Vapers Alliance and other folks in this space who are looking into the actual science of this, the evidence of this, and can help make sense of what is legitimate and what is just unfortunate fear mongering or clickbait or whatever it may be. Unfortunately, though, like that fear mongering clickbait stuff goes a long way and does a lot of damage. So I think we need to just push back as much as we can and with the actual studies and facts that we know to be true.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, just a little bit of advertising of our own podcast here. That's what we're trying to do. We're inviting people like Liz who are directly working with policymakers, but also inviting scientists who are working on research papers and who will provide right away the scientific information, but in an easier form for all of us to understand, where they're just following on a policy side or on a consumer side. So definitely we have a big, variety of guests who provided very valuable insights, including Liz right now. So I think it's really nice if you just search through the whole playlist and check out. I think we're moving to the kind of the last part of our conversation for today. And I just want to, as someone who is a fighter for consumers and someone who is fighting very counterproductive potential legislation or the legislation that is already in place that only hurts consumers, I'd like to ask you what will be your message for consumers in the USA. You said that there is still hope, so maybe we could end more or less on a positive note. And
Yes.
yeah.
There is still hope. There is. I promise you there's still hope. But my message to consumers is we need you. We need you. We need your help. We need you to make your voices heard. It's fun. It's fun to talk to legislators. It is, I promise. Don't be shy. The more that you make your voices heard, the more important it is. Public opinion does play a huge role with these politicians and those folks that are making these laws and regulations. The more that we can showcase that we like these products, we want them to be on the market, and they do serve value to society, the more they're going to listen to that, and the more they're going to actually look into this and not just ban everything. So if you're not already signed up with World Vapers Alliance, please do immediately. They do great, fantastic work advocating for these, not only, in certain countries, but literally all around the world. That's why they're World Vapers Alliance. If you ever need help in the US, you can always hit me up. I'm happy to give you guys some tips or let you know what's going on. But we really just want consumers to get out there and tell the politicians what you want. That's what's going to make things better. I also would add a caveat too of, do it in ideally an educated way, learn about the studies, bring a couple talking points with you. Again, vaping 95% less harmful than smoking. That I feel like we all know, but you would be surprised how many people who are regulating these products don't even know that, so you don't have to be an expert in all the science and stuff like that. But just as a consumer who's aware, we need your help. So please help us, help you, help the world be better and improve public health. And then I'd also say to policymakers, just please, for goodness sake, make some better choices and start acknowledging the science behind these innovative products. If the goal is to improve public health, then it's time to embrace these innovative nicotine alternatives. I love to point at Sweden. If there's any Swedes on this podcast, shout out to you guys. You guys are leading the way. I use your country as an example constantly. A great example of how we can put forth good policies and help people live longer, healthier lives without banning stuff. So that's my message to you all. Go forth, advocate, join WVA, and help us keep vaping and nicotine alternatives on the market.
Thank you so much, Liz. I couldn't agree more with what you said. Just stay informed, keep actively fighting for vaping, and there is still hope, right? So thank you so much to Liz, first of all, for a very valuable insight, just, elaborating on what's going on in the US in such a clear way for our listeners. I'm sure they're going to enjoy it as much as I did. Follow the Consumer Choice Center, Liz's work. You're going to find very interesting things on their website. It's going to be all in the description of the podcast, as always. And thank you to our listeners who are with us from an episode to an episode, and stay tuned for the next one. Obviously, we're going to be back in a week. Thank you, and vape on.